I know I actually did that. And let's say are busing together for learning Torah. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise to you, Lord our God, rule the universe, who's made us holy with your commandments and commanded us to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. And with that, let's have some theater. So, Kamtza and Bar-Kamtza, a 3-act story. Carol Flank, would you do us the honors of reading the first act, please? Carol Flank, would you read the first text, please?
Oh, sure. Sure.
Thank you.
The Gemara explains destroyed on account of Kamsa and
You're muted, Carol.
You know what? I don't think my connection is very strong.
Okay.
Someone else should probably do it. It just went off on me and started up again. So
No worries. All right. Thank you anyway. Thank you for trying. Brenda, would you read our first text, please?
Sure. The Gemara explains Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamsa and Bar-Kamtza. This is as there was a certain man whose friend was named Kamsa and whose enemy was named Bar-Kamtza. He once made a large feast and said to his servant, "Go bring me my friend Kamsa." The servant went and mistakenly brought him his enemy Bar-Kamtza. The man who was hosting the feast came and found Bar-Kamtza sitting at the feast. The host said to Bar-Kamtza, "The man is the enemy, Bal-Davava, that man. That is, you are my enemy. What then do you want here? Arise and leave." Bar-Kamtza said to him, "Since I have already come, let me stay, and I will give you money for whatever I eat and drink. Just do not embarrass me by sending me out." The host said to him, "No, you must leave." Bar-Kamtza said to him, "I will give you money for half of the feast. Just do not send me away." The host said to him, "No, you must leave." Bar-Kamtza then said to him, "I will give you money for the entire feast. Just let me stay." The host said to him, "No, you must leave." Finally, the host took Bar-Kamtza by his hand, stood him up, and took him out.
Okay, thank you. Before you read the context, how many of you, by a raise of hands, are familiar with this story? Okay. So for those of you that are familiar with this story, do your best to focus only on this text, and for the rest of you, it'll be very easy to only focus on the part of the story that we've read because you don't know the rest of it yet. All right. Brenda, if you would read our context, please.
This is from the Babylonian Talmud, Masechet Tractate Gittin, which is about divorce. The Mishnah 5:6 explores the question of buying a field from a couple who is divorcing, and in particular, how this might have been affected by the circumstances during the destruction. The Gemara then poses the question of why the Romans were destroying Jerusalem in the first place, and it brings this story to explain what happened.
Thank you. Okay. Let's start with our first question. We've got a bunch of questions to get through. Who is at fault here? I'm going to shrink text a little bit so we can read more of it.
Well, it depends what you're trying to find fault with. there's any number of things that kind of went wrong. There was the servant who brought the wrong man. There's the host who, I don't know, you could say, what didn't treat Bar-Kamtza very well. So, you know, there's probably two people I could find fault with.
Great. Anybody else have a thought on the matter?
No, I agree with Alan. I find fault more with the host. There was an error made, but you don't throw someone out of your home.
Well,
We don't know what the guy did.
it all depends on the history, I would say.
We don't know that, right?
Okay. All right.
And David, just going back toward the beginning, the sentence that says, that man is the enemy of that man. That is, you are my enemy. Is that implying, or is that saying that Bar-Kamtza may not have actually had a problem with the host, but may have had a problem with a friend of the host or a business associate of the host or someone who the host davens with? And so the host took it upon himself to say, you know, because you and my friend don't get along, therefore you and I don't get along.
Good question. I don't know. It's entirely possible. This is the only, that's not true. I was going to say this is the only text of Bar-Kamtza of the story, but there is one alternative version in Eicha Rabbah. I don't know that other version has anything else to say about why, like, who Bar-Kamtza doesn't like in relation to the host. So it's entirely possible. And a close read of the text, like you have just done, might suggest that the host is a second-hand enemy of Bar-Kamtza.
Well, maybe the host doesn't want to have his friends or his invited guest hurt or feeling ill because there was one of his enemies that arrived there, and he doesn't want to make that other person feel uncomfortable. We don't know what the relationship is there, but I don't know if I would want to invite somebody that makes if there was someone in the room that made one of my close friends, or not, even someone who I wanted to honor for some reason, make him feel uncomfortable or angry, and then you don't know what could evolve under those circumstances. So are you avoiding a conflict? You don't know. You're at a party. Do you want to say somebody's going to have too much to eat and drink? I mean, all sorts of things can happen. You could also think about that as far as international relationships or relationships between different people, different entities in politics. There's all sorts of ways to look at this.
Good.
It's true that we don't know the whole story behind this enmity, but I still think the host is to blame, because Bar-Kamtza says to him, don't embarrass me by sending me out. And I think that is something we're forbidden from doing, is to publicly humiliate people like that.
If Bar-Kamtza stays, the tension in the room could be very great, and that might embarrass him even more. I think it'd be a very uncomfortable situation if Bar-Kamtza did stay, for everybody that was present.
Of course, you can look at it with a little different thing too, that he keeps offering him to pay for his food, then he offers to pay for half the feast, then he offers for the entire feast. It's kind of like he's trying to buy his way into this evening.
Yeah.
So what price do you put on friendship? That's what you're saying. What price do you pay on you're almost bribing somebody, you're paying somebody to induce him to allow you, so you're turning this into a commercial transaction?
Perhaps he knows he's guilty of something and he doesn't want to be outed in that, that he's begging by offering to pay for everything, to not to just be embarrassed, but to be caught at something that, or made accountable for something that he's done. So he's trying to make it so that won't happen. He won't be out in the open.
I actually have a question. David, I know you do a lot of looking at other sources to back up the main source that you choose. Is there anything about the what in any of the other sources is there any clue as to what Bar-Kamtza might have done that could cause the host to not want him there or to be his enemy?
There is rabbinic commentary where they try to guess, but I would be willing to say that that the rabbis know nothing more than we know and are just coming up with their own ideas.
Well, this all may be a hypothetical to make people think, just as we're doing about what logic you can make out of what is the interplay of relationships, and how do you sense how you manage other people's feelings, their sensitivities, things. And it's just maybe not so straightforward. It's complicated. This just might be just a riddle to exercise our intellectual thought processes.
So let's go on, and actually let's consider another question. At what point could the story have been changed, or at what points?
Servant could have brought the right man in.
Well, I think that every time that Bar-Kamtza makes a plea for leniency or compassion, I think that each one of those could have been met, and it would have changed the course of the entire story. It almost has a feel to me like there was, with the amount of pleading, that there was some kind of established relationship, whatever this wedding was. And so the plea was, of course, for embarrassment, but it seems a bit deeper, almost like, this wedding's important to you too. Let me pay for it. As a way of not only saving himself from embarrassment, but also maybe a way of making amends or indicating to the host that it was also important for him. But again, maybe just one of the hypotheticals to throw out there.
And hypotheticals are welcome, as long as they are not contradicted by the plain meaning of the text. Go where you like.
And another hypothetical is that I have a vague memory from previous discussion on this many years ago, that that Bar-Kamtza may have been interpreting the fact that he got invited to this event as the host making up with him or something, and then it becomes all the more horrifying when the host throws him out.
Mm-hmm.
It would have changed if he had just gotten up and left in the beginning. At the first time he was asked to do so and he did, then end of story.
Yep.
Or the host could have said to him, well, you can stay, but you have to sit far away from everybody else and not participate in any conversation. I mean, he could have put conditions on him.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the host, when he sent out his servant, if he really didn't want Bar-Kamtza, could have also said, you know, make sure you invite my friend Kamtza, and make sure you stay away from my enemy, Bar-Kamtza.
Yeah. All right. Did anybody make a good decision?
Kamtza obviously never really planned a wedding where you try to sit everybody and do the best you can of getting the people who are, you know, sort of not always the best of friends, but the least objectionable at tables. So, you know, he could have done some of that too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if the host had put out place cards, Bar-Kamtza would not have been, there would have been no problem. Bar-Kamtza would never have found a place card for himself.
There you go.
All right. Next question. What lessons about leadership can be learned from this?
Be more explicit with your servants when you give them orders.
That's good.
Mm.
Did you say what can we learn about leadership?
Yeah.
Well, that sometimes a leader has to make concessions also, which the host would have to have made.
Mm.
But do you sustain loyalty and support your friends? If you show them you will support them and you're not going to abandon them. What kind of a leader, you know, leads you towards something and says, "Sorry guys, I'm leaving. It's up to you now," or I'm not going to support you as far as against your enemies. If Bar-Kamtza was an enemy of one of this gentleman's friends or allies or intimates, then I mean, what confidence does his friend have in loyalty and support? If not in this occasion, another occasion.
We don't know what the crime is that this guy committed. I mean, if he killed somebody or if he harmed this person, I mean, maybe it's just some personality clash. We don't know that. I think
right, you're absolutely correct, because maybe if it's a minor, if there's some sort of conflicts, then you may you may try and take advantage of this as an opportunity to improve the situation or relationship if you're able to manage to mediate something.
Right.
And then you have a different type of leadership about how you are managing to make peace, shall we say, between two parties. That would be to the benefit of, well, we know what the benefits of peace are. So, right. And even if it was an egregious insult, maybe it's still be in the folks' best interest to be able to resolve it, and it might be helpful to the community to be able to put this thing to rest.
Should the other guests have done anything? And if so, why might they not have done so?
Would you repeat that?
Should the other guests have done anything? And if so, why might they not have done so?
We don't know if the other guests knew about the situation between the friend of Bar-Kamtza, no, I'm sorry, the friend of the host and Bar-Kamtza. We don't know if they were aware of the problems, so they may not have known that there was anything to do. They also may not have known that there was this ongoing conflict at the dinner, because we don't know. Well, it's not clear if the host said to Bar-Kamtza basically, oh no, I'm sorry, never mind. He's basically saying arise and leave. So he's sitting at the table.
If you were in a restaurant with 20 of your friends at dinner and all of a sudden some drunk came along and sat down at your table and started making a fuss, what would you do? Let him stay? Would you escort him away? Or would you yell at him to leave?
In a situation like that, maybe not one person was hosting. It would just be a group of friends. So that would have to be a collective decision unless one person decided to take charge. But in this situation, there was a host. So it was up to the host, I guess, to decide how to handle it.
Right, because if all the other people got involved, it could turn into a real, a big fight.
But Herb, in your scenario, is the drunk, I mean, is that just somebody who wandered in off the street or from the bar and said, I'm going to sit down at this table? Or was it somebody who everybody at the table knew?
No, just somebody who decided to come and sit down.
Well, I think if somebody came and tried to, impose themselves, I would call the manager of the restaurant and say, get this guy out of here. But that's different than the circumstances of, this banquet where everybody kind of knew one another. They may not have liked one another, but they knew one another. At least that's how I read it.
I just think that it would have been preferable to take that person aside and speak to it without this kind of public humiliation.
You mean the host should have talked to him? Are you talking about that one, Doris?
Yes.
Or instead of just embarrassing him in front of everybody.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, let's go into Act 2. See what happens.
This is fun.
Ava, would you read, please?
After having been cast out from the feast, Bar-Kamtza said to himself, since the sages were sitting there and did not protest the actions of the host, although they saw how he humiliated me, learn from it that they were content with what he did, the host. I will therefore go and inform Schwartz against them to the king. He went and said to the emperor, "Whoa, the Jews have rebelled against you." The emperor said to him, "Who says that this is the case?" Bar-Kamtza said to him, "Go and test them. Send them an offering to be brought in honor of the government and see whether they will sacrifice it." Obviously an animal. The emperor went and sent with him a choice 3-year-old calf. While Bar-Kamtza was coming with the calf to the temple, he made a blemish on the calf's upper lip. And some say he made the blemish on its eyelids, a place where, according to us, according to halakha, it is a blemish. But according to them, Gentile rules for their offerings, it is not a blemish. Therefore, when Bar-Kamtza brought the animal to the temple, the priests would not, the emperor's animal to the temple, the priests would not sacrifice it on the altar since it was blemished. But they also could not explain this satisfactorily to the Gentile authorities, who did not consider it to be blemished.
All right, end of Act 2.
Yeah, he isn't a very nice person. Yeah. I mean, that was terrible what he did. It's like, he gets even.
Well, Bar-Kamtza misrepresented what happened to the emperor enough, and then he did something to mar the animal.
Right.
I know purposely to cause problems in retribution to his original insult or perceived insult.
He also raised the stakes a lot, or the stakes in the story get raised a lot by it saying, since the sages were sitting there. We didn't know that there were sages in the first part of the story.
So how does that make it any different?
I might have thought that the sages would have, it's a different group of people who are sitting at the table or who are at the dinner. There's a different gravity to this audience. It's not only just a bunch of friends. It's this, the leading citizens of the community. I don't know if there are any specific laws that they might have brought to bear on what happened in the original scenario sitting around the table, but they didn't.
They also may have known something about this man that we don't know.
Yep.
But if
Bar-Kamtza is a Jew, supposedly, says that the Jews have rebelled, implying that all the Jews have rebelled. Wouldn't that include him as well?
Yeah. Yes, but not necessarily. He could be the heroic Jew who's decided to play nice and not rebel against the Romans.
sometimes maybe they would have avoided problems if the gentleman wouldn't have acted, the host wouldn't have acted so impulsively without considering what the consequences might be if we see this Bar-Kamtza has some influence with the emperor and how he might try and seek some sort of revenge for his mistreatment or perceived mistreatment. So sometimes you never know what the consequences of an act are. Maybe you need to think things through a bit more before you act. You're creating a whole new series of problems of a greater magnitude.
So at what points could the story have been changed in the second act?
Well, he just went home and minded his own business and not ran to the emperor to get even.
Well, and then here, if it's the question is that there's some conflict or friction between the shall I say, the non-Jews and the Jews that are in a minority position, then or there's a misunderstanding that maybe we lost an opportunity to be able to come to improve relationships by allowing the gentleman to start, the gentleman of that person to remain there at the feast.
It's kind of everything we're doing though, is we're making assumptions because we don't really know the whole story.
Yeah, exactly. We don't know.
What if the sages had protested? So that would have changed things too.
Definitely. And isn't that what sages do?
If they followed the Talmud, the sages would argue among themselves what to do, and maybe it comes to no conclusion at all.
Anyway,
I was wondering why he went to the emperor as opposed to, I don't know, going to a Beit Din. But then I realized that he wouldn't go to a Beit Din because the sages have already said what their response would be by their actions at the dinner.
Yeah. Did anybody make a good decision in this act?
No. Oh, well, yes, well, maybe the emperor, because he didn't immediately act on it. I mean, Bar-Kamtza said to him, go and test them. I mean, the emperor could have said, never mind, I'll just take care of it myself. I mean, Bar-Kamtza is building it up into more than it is. Of course, why would the emperor believe this guy? Charles, you called him a gentleman. I don't think I would call
no, that's why I regretted that. My apologies.
Yeah, right. He's not a good person.
No, or should I say shall I give it a more sarcastic tone?
Yes, this guy. That's what I called him, this guy.
What lessons about leadership can be learned from this act?
Doesn't say much for the king. You did everything, just believe, depending, unless he trusted this Bar-Kamtza for some reason.
I heard that. What fireworks? Is that what it was?
Yeah, but the emperor, I said, who says that this is the case? I mean, he didn't immediately just say, punish the people, or I believe you, do something bad to them. I mean, that is a leadership role. Let's check this out. But then, of course, he listened to what Bar-Kamtza said then.
Well, if you're a good leader, I suppose you would try and study all the facets, understand all the facets of a situation, and the interest of all the parties involved. A good politician hopefully would do that and to assess the situation before he makes a decision. If he's looking for support to be able to move forward with his policies.
What does this text say about our obligation to speak up about injustices in our time now?
Can we see that sentence, David?
What does this text say about our obligation to speak up about injustices in our times now?
I think that the sages had an opportunity whether to side with one, whether to side with the other, or to mediate. I think how that may play out now is don't straddle the fence. If we see an injustice and we have the ability, then we need to make a step forward and to say something or take an action that we are able to do.
I think it was also incumbent upon the emperor in this case to send the goat or sheep, whatever it was, with someone who was neutral and not with one person from one side who had an axe to grind.
Yeah.
I would say you're right. You would hope that a good leader would be able to distinguish when someone has some bias that may be a negative influence to your decisions.
Right, and not send Bar-Kamtza, send somebody, as you said, that was neutral. That was a mistake.
All right, let's see how the story ends up.
Yeah, it was.
Doris, would you read, please?
The blemish notwithstanding, this, whoops.
Sorry, there we go.
Sages thought to sacrifice the animal as an offering due to the imperative to maintain peace with the government. Rabbi Zechariah ben Kolas said to them, if the priests do that, the people will say that blemished animals may be sacrificed as offerings on the altar. The sages said, if we do not sacrifice it, then we must prevent Bar-Kamtza from reporting this to the emperor. The sages thought to kill him so he would not go and speak against them. Rabbi Zechariah said to them, if you kill him, people will say that one who makes a blemish on sacrificed animals is to be killed. As a result, they did nothing. Bar-Kamtza's slander was accepted by the authorities, and consequently, the war between the Jews and the Romans began. Rabbi Yohanan says, the excessive humility of Rabbi Zechariah ben Kolas destroyed our temple, burned our sanctuary, and exiled us from our land.
Okay, and we get an epilogue a little bit later. If you would keep reading this, please.
To conclude the story of Kamsa and Bar-Kamtza and the destruction of Jerusalem, the Gemara cites a Baraita. It is taught, Rabbi Elazar says, come and see how great is the power of shame. For the Holy One, blessed be God, assisted Bar-Kamtza, who had been humiliated. And due to this humiliation and shame, God destroyed God's temple and burned God's sanctuary.
Thank you. Great. So who is at fault here? I'm going to shrink the text so we can see a little bit more.
Not doing anything. Everybody, nobody, they avoided the situation.
I think it says that the host was to blame for this, for humiliating. I'm going back to my original thesis, but by humiliating Bar-Kamtza, God sided against him, and the fact that no one stood up for him made God side against the whole Jewish community and allowed them to destroy the temple.
But how such a small thing can result in such a terrible disaster as a war. If he had gotten up and left, this wouldn't have happened.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, right.
Well, it's
How come the sages were so, I mean, wanting to kill him?
it shows the kinds of extremes that can happen when you don't have all the facts and you just go by what you see, but you don't dig deeper to find out the details, and you just act. It's almost like an impulsive domino of events.
Impulse. That's my favorite word. I've learned from my own sad experiences that I should not act on impulse, because when I was younger, I did it more often and it caused more problems, because you can't foresee, or you're not grasping. I didn't have the maturity to understand what the chain of events that could evolve from just taking a very impulsive reaction that in the instant seemed the right thing to do, but the consequences of how does this impact something else, another, and then so sometimes it's that I've learned at least to wait a few days sometimes, but I'm really am tempted to act on impulse, to consider the things and how they might evolve, and sometimes things resolve themselves without having to act. Well, I'm not saying it'll happen in this case, but
well, it shows the importance of good leadership, that you can't shoot from the hip. You have to work it out.
David, could you scroll down just a little so we can see the last couple of lines?
Yeah. Or I can try. There we go. So we've got one who we have Rabbi Yochanan saying Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkos, because he was excessively humble. That's why we had the problem. And then we've got Rabbi Elazar saying that it's the rabbis and the host for causing shame.
Yeah, but what do we say then about God, who assisted him because of his humiliation and destroyed the temple and burned the sanctuary? It doesn't seem like God was punishing him. He was assisting him.
Maybe we should avoid humiliating people.
I mean, yeah, that's strange, a little strange, I think, fine.
Yeah.
When you think about it, Bar-Kamtza was worried about what other people would think of him, which is why he didn't want to be embarrassed. The rabbis were guilty of exactly the same thing that Bar-Kamtza was.
Mm-hmm.
So why would this be a story that the rabbis told about themselves?
Because if you do nothing and you worry too much about the consequences, you're also in trouble.
Sorry.
Well, then the other issue is, for the greater good, do you infringe somehow on some other law or regulation that compared to whose damage would be minor compared to the consequences of not doing it?
Kind of reminds me of the game of gossip, where you sit down in a circle and you start telling a story, and what goes in the first ears and what comes out of the last mouth is different.
Right. The telephone game.
Yeah, and so the consequences of the final statements could lead to something horrible, because as I was saying earlier, the whole story wasn't known and everything was based on hearsay, And one thing led to another, and it just became a terrible ending because people just acted as if, because somebody said something and they just believed it and just reacted to it. But I don't know why God would do that.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time figuring.
Yeah, that's where I'm stuck too. I don't know why that comes in at the end.
I think the problem is that they didn't do something. They should have spoken up. They should have defended Bar-Kamtza from that public humiliation. And they didn't. And the whole community was punished.
And that even the smartest people, like the sages, didn't know what to do.
Perhaps another way of looking at this whole thing is that the rabbis were wrestling with how could God let the Romans destroy Jerusalem and exile us from the Promised Land, and came up with a story like this as a way of trying to teach future generations a value by inserting this into the fact of the history that Rome did destroy Jerusalem and did exile them.
Because it starts out as just an enemy, two people that don't like each other, and it ends up with the destruction of the temple and the sanctuary. And
one thing we never heard of at the beginning was what we have heard nothing of Kamza. We never know if he would have been unhappy if Bar-Kamtza stayed for the dinner. The host never asked him.
right.
We don't even know if he was there.
Right. Right, if the host sent his man to his servant to get him.
Maybe his little place card is still sitting on the table.
Right. That's wild.
So with that, I'm going to show a modern take that another educator made. Here we go. Ploni Almoni means like so-and-so. It's for a nameless person such as the host. All right. So I'll stop the share. Before I stop the share, I'll send you the source sheet, but there's a Reader's Theater version that I put together from this.
So this is a lot of fun, David.
Thank you. There's a video that someone put together of this.
Oh, wow.
And somebody else gave me permission to use his version set in a high school. So
is this where you're making a mountain out of a molehill comes from? Because they sure did.
Certainly did. So I'm going to stop the recording.